Howard Lutnick sat beneath the blinding lights, his voice faltering as the cameras rolled. His once practiced charm seemed to crack with every syllable. Papers shuffled nervously in his hands, the edges curling from the sweat of his grip. For a man who had built his reputation on confidence and control, this was a scene no one expected. His face, flushed and tightening, betrayed the panic he tried desperately to conceal. What you're about to witness left Wall Street itself in stunned silence and one billionaire gasping for air. The head of Cantor Fitzgerald, long hailed as an untouchable titan of finance, found himself cornered in a public reckoning that not even his billions could buy him out of. The chamber was still, every ear tuned, every camera locked. His voice wavered, breaking in places it never had before, as if the weight of truth pressed down harder than any market crash. It wasn't just a stumble. It was the unraveling of a man who had lived decades believing power and money could shield him from accountability. And across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, steady, unblinking, her silence more powerful than his stumbling words. She hadn't even spoken yet. She didn't need to. The tension built with every passing second, with every bead of sweat that rolled down his forehead. The imbalance was clear. A titan of finance suddenly reduced to fragility, and a rising political force waiting to deliver a blow he would never forget. The audience watching from home, scrolling on their phones, could feel it. The pause before impact, the silence before the storm. Everyone knew they were about to witness something rare. Not another polished speech or a safe exchange, but a moment that would pierce through the scripted theater of Washington and expose the raw nerve of Wall Street arrogance. Lutnick tried to recover, clearing his throat, forcing a smirk that only made the room colder. It was the look of a man pretending to be unshaken, even as his foundation quaked. Because he knew, and so did every observer, that Crockett had come armed with more than questions. She had come with truth sharp enough to cut through his empire of denial. But the words that came next would ignite a firestorm on Capitol Hill. For decades, Wall Street had operated like a kingdom above the law, skyscrapers piercing the sky as symbols of unchecked power, traders moving billions with a keystroke, and executives like Howard Lutnick sitting atop it all with the smug certainty that no one could challenge them. Cantor Fitzgerald, the firm he commanded, wasn't just a financial institution. It was a fortress of privilege, a reminder that in America's economy, some men play by different rules. Lutnick had become the embodiment of that fortress, polished, unyielding, and untouchable. But outside those glass towers, ordinary Americans felt the cost. Families drowning in debt, communities stripped by corporate greed, and workers told to tighten their belts while billionaires collected bonuses larger than entire school budgets. Every bailout, every backroom deal whispered the same truth. Wall Street's gains came at the public's expense, and sitting in that chamber was the physical clash of those two worlds. Jasmine Crockett had built her career standing firmly on the opposite side. She wasn't born into boardrooms or hedge funds. Her story was one of grit, resilience, and relentless honesty. As a public defender, she had spoken for people who had no voice. As a legislator, she had become a sharp blade against hypocrisy, unafraid to call out corruption in the boldest terms. Her reputation preceded her. When Crockett leaned into the microphone, the room knew something real was about to be said. The confrontation between Crockett and Lutnick was never just about two individuals. It was about what they represented. He was the system-polished shoes stepping over the struggles of working families, smirking behind numbers and jargon meant to confuse and disarm. She was the counterweight, a reminder that dignity and justice still had defenders willing to stare down the giants. And the cameras knew it too. Every lens tightened, every microphone hummed with anticipation. On social media, whispers of the hearing had already begun spreading. Clips of Lutnick's trembling voice were being replayed, dissected, mocked, but everyone watching understood instinctively. This wasn't the climax yet. This was the drum roll before the drop. The stakes stretched far beyond one billionaire's embarrassment. This was about whether power could still be held accountable in the United States. If Lutnick faltered, it wasn't just his image on the line, it was Wall Street's aura of invincibility. And if Crockett delivered, It wouldn't just be a victory for her career, but for every person who had ever looked at the wealth gap and wondered if justice had any teeth left. Inside the chamber, aides shifted nervously in their seats, sensing the buildup. Reporters sharpened their pens, waiting for the spark that would define the headline. And in that silence, Jasmine Crockett's calm presence felt heavier than any outburst could. She didn't need theatrics. She needed only the truth. Everyone in the chamber knew something big was coming, but no one knew just how. Explosive it would be. Howard Lutnick's name had long been spoken in financial circles, with a mix of awe and resentment. To the titans of Wall Street, he was the embodiment of success, a man who had survived tragedy, rebuilt Cantor Fitzgerald after 9/11, and turned it into a sprawling empire that touched every corner of the global markets. To ordinary Americans, however, he was the face of everything they distrusted about the financial elite: wealth without empathy, privilege without accountability, power without limits. In boardrooms, Lutnick carried himself like a monarch, his suits tailored to perfection, his words chosen to intimidate as much as persuade. He moved through the world with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. To him, money wasn't just a tool, it was armor. Every deal he struck, every politician he courted, every regulation he dismissed with a laugh reinforced the illusion that Wall Street was above the law, and he was its crown prince. But behind the carefully polished image, controversies followed him like shadows. He had once been praised for generosity in the wake of national tragedy. Yet critics noted how quickly that generosity vanished when it came to protecting workers and clients in the long run. There were whispers of deals that reeked of greed, of cold decisions made with no regard for the families whose futures were collateral damage. To Lutnick, those families were just numbers on a balance sheet. Losses were acceptable risks. Pain was market correction. This disconnect from ordinary people wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Lutnick, like so many of his peers, had built walls of privilege so high that he no longer had to see the human cost of his empire. While Americans struggled with foreclosures, job losses, and rising costs of living, Lutnick boasted of record profits and bonuses. He lived in a world of penthouses, private jets, and exclusive galas, far removed from the reality of the millions who silently shouldered the burdens of Wall Street's recklessness. To hear him speak was to hear a man convinced of his own invincibility. He dismissed critics as uninformed, politicians as opportunists, and activists as dreamers who didn't understand how the world really works. In his view, markets rewarded the strong and punished the weak, and he was among the chosen few smart enough to stay on top. That conviction wasn't just confidence. It was arrogance sharpened over decades of unchecked power. And so when he entered the congressional chamber, Lutnick didn't see it as a battlefield. He saw it as another stage, another chance to show the world that no matter the accusations, no matter the questions, he could command the room with the force of his presence. His allies whispered reassurances. His advisors reminded him that lawmakers came and went, but Wall Street endured. He believed them. But that belief, that smug certainty, was the flaw that would soon betray him. For in his world, challengers were supposed to fold under pressure. Yet he had never faced someone like Jasmine Crockett, someone who didn't fear his billions, someone who didn't care about currying his favor. She wasn't there to negotiate or to flatter. She was there to confront. And that was the one variable Lutnick had never accounted for: truth. A truth spoken plainly, without deference to wealth or status, has the power to pierce even the thickest walls of privilege. Howard Lutnick had built a life convinced he was untouchable. But arrogance has a way of crumbling when confronted with truth. Jasmine Crockett's story does not begin in the halls of Congress. It begins far away from marble columns and mahogany boardrooms, in neighborhoods where people worked long hours, stretched thin paychecks, and carried on with resilience born of necessity. She was shaped by the grit of ordinary Americans, by the kind of families who know what it means to fight for every opportunity, who understand that dignity isn't given, it's defended. Long before she faced down Wall Street titans, Crockett was a young woman who saw up close how power often tilted against those who had the least. Her community taught her that silence in the face of injustice was complicity, and she refused to stay silent. That fire propelled her into law, not as a means of prestige but as a weapon for justice. While others from her generation may have chased corporate salaries, Crockett chose the trenches of public defense. She sat across from people who had nothing but their stories and their humanity, and she gave them a voice when the system wanted only to silence them. In those cramped courtrooms, she learned a skill that no Wall Street executive could ever buy: composure under fire. Day after day, she faced prosecutors armed with more resources, judges impatient with her clients, and a system that demanded speed over fairness. And yet she stood, case after case, with a voice that never wavered. She learned how to cut through intimidation, how to expose hypocrisy, and how to speak in a way that made the powerful uncomfortable and the powerless feel seen. Her rise in politics followed the same pattern. While others rehearsed talking points, Crockett spoke from lived conviction. She did not varnish her words or chase applause. She was blunt, sharp, unafraid to call out corruption and bigotry no matter who stood in her path. When cameras rolled, she didn't play to them. She looked through them, as if speaking directly to the millions who had been told their struggles didn't matter. Moments of pressure only hardened her resolve. In debates, she faced opponents who tried to dismiss her with condescension. Instead of backing down, she sharpened her responses into mic-drop moments that left rooms buzzing. On the House floor, when colleagues sought to drown her out with noise, she steadied her tone and pressed on, refusing to let volume replace substance. She understood something fundamental. Courage isn't loud, it's consistent. What set her apart most was her authenticity. Crockett's words carried the weight of experience, not the polish of consultants. When she spoke about working families, it wasn't theoretical, it was memory. When she denounced greed, it wasn't abstract, it was because she had seen what greed did to neighborhoods like hers. And when she looked across the aisle or across the chamber at someone like Howard Lutnick, she wasn't intimidated. She saw a man who had never lived her reality, and therefore could never truly understand the strength it had given her. To audiences watching her career unfold, Jasmine Crockett represented more than a politician. She was proof that the American story didn't belong only to the privileged few who inherited power. It belonged to the daughter of working people, to the public defender who stood with the marginalized, to the fighter who refused to let arrogance go unchallenged. She embodied the dignity of resilience, the sharpness of truth, and the refusal to bow before wealth. And so when Crockett entered the chamber to face Howard Lutnick, she did not arrive as an underdog. She arrived as the culmination of every courtroom battle she had fought, every debate she had won, every time she had stood firm against a system built to break people like her. She was calm because she had been here before, in different forms, countless times. She was confident because her power wasn't borrowed from wealth or status. It was earned through years of standing in the fire and refusing to be consumed. Across from her, Lutnick clung to his billions, his legacy, his arrogance. But Crockett carried something far more dangerous to the powerful: authenticity. She was the unvarnished voice of people who had long been ignored, and that voice had no price tag, no leash, no script. And this was the moment her fire would meet Wall Street's fear. The hearing room was a theater of democracy, but on that day it felt more like an arena. The air was thick, charged with expectation. Every chair was filled, every reporter's pen poised, every camera lens honed in. Screens across the nation broadcast the moment live, turning a simple hearing into a stage upon which power itself would be tested. Howard Lutnick sat with the posture of a man who had played this role before. His expression was calculated arrogance, lips curling into a faint smile as if the entire proceeding were beneath him. He leaned back in his chair, projecting comfort, dismissing the gravity of the moment with the ease of someone who believed money had always been his shield. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett radiated an entirely different energy: calm, composed. Her presence wasn't loud or exaggerated. It was steady, deliberate. Every tilt of her head, every measured pause suggested she was not there to perform, she was there to reveal. And that, more than anything, unsettled the titan across from her. When the questioning began, Lutnick tried to seize the tempo. He waved off criticisms, brushing aside concerns with jargon-heavy explanations meant to bore, not enlighten. He smirked when asked about Wall Street greed, turning the issue into a joke about how the market works. Laughter flickered in his voice, but it didn't reach his eyes. Crockett, unflinching, pressed forward. Her tone was precise, every question cutting closer to the bone. She didn't allow him the luxury of hiding behind abstract numbers. She demanded clarity, demanded accountability, demanded he speak not as a banker, but as a human being responsible for consequences he preferred to ignore. Lutnick's dismissiveness grew sharper. He began interrupting, raising his voice slightly, trying to overpower her words with his own. He glanced toward the cameras, attempting to shift the narrative with a practiced blend of charm and impatience. But each interruption only made the contrast clearer. While he fumbled, Crockett remained anchored, her voice unwavering, her cadence firm. For the public watching, the frustration was palpable. Viewers at home, already weary of Wall Street arrogance, leaned closer to their screens, hoping Crockett would push harder. In the chamber, aides shuffled, journalists exchanged glances, sensing that the tension had reached a boiling point. It was the universal drama of power, arrogance clashing with authenticity, privilege colliding with truth. Each exchange felt heavier than the last. Lutnick's interruptions revealed not dominance, but insecurity, while Crockett's refusal to yield revealed strength. The imbalance of power began to invert. The billionaire looked smaller with every word, the Congresswoman larger with every pause. And then it happened, the silence before the storm. Crockett leaned forward, locking eyes with Howard Lutnick. Her gaze was unblinking, her posture unshaken. The room seemed to still, the cameras zooming in, the audience collectively holding its breath. And then Crockett leaned forward, locked eyes with Lutnick, and dropped the words that would haunt Wall Street. For a moment the room froze. The cameras zoomed in, microphones sharpened, and every breath seemed suspended in midair. Jasmine Crockett's voice cut through the silence like a blade, steady and piercing. Not a shout, not a plea, but a declaration. Mr. Lutnick, while you sit here pretending that Wall Street's hands are clean, the truth is staring us all in the face. Your firm has profited off the same predatory practices that left working families bankrupt, that pushed people out of their homes, that widened the gap between the rich and everyone else. And you expect us to believe you're the victim here? Gasps rippled through the chamber. Pens scratched furiously against paper. Reporters glanced at one another as though they'd just witnessed a political earthquake. Lutnick's smirk evaporated in an instant. He shifted in his seat, his face reddening as the cameras captured every flicker of discomfort. The man who once commanded trading floors with an iron presence now looked cornered, his practiced confidence slipping into panic. Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly, her words measured with surgical precision. Your wealth isn't just the product of smart business, Mr. Lutnick. It's the product of a system designed to let men like you take without giving back, to gamble with lives you'll never have to live, and to walk away richer while others pay the price. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Howard Lutnick had no ready-made line, no clever deflection. He fumbled with his notes, shuffling papers that suddenly seemed useless. His throat tightened as he muttered a weak response. Congresswoman, I think you're misunderstanding. But Crockett cut in, her voice rising just enough to command the room. No, Mr. Lutnick. What I understand is the difference between working for the people and working for profit. What I understand is that while you flew private jets, millions of Americans were deciding whether to pay rent or buy groceries. What I understand is that Wall Street has treated human suffering as a line item on a spreadsheet, and you've built an empire out of it. A murmur ran through the gallery. The cameras captured every bead of sweat glistening on Lutnick's forehead, every twitch of his hands as he tried and failed to compose himself. His usual arrogance, the aura of a man untouchable, had been stripped away in real time. On social media, the eruption was immediate. Clips of Crockett's words flooded Twitter within minutes. The hashtag Wall Street Exposed began trending, accompanied by fiery captions. Crockett just destroyed Lutnick on live TV. Memes sprouted instantly, side-by-side images of Lutnick sweating, contrasted with Crockett's steady gaze. TikTok users clipped her lines into punchy edits, layered over dramatic music. Instagram reels spread the confrontation like wildfire, turning a congressional hearing into a cultural moment. Back in the chamber, Lutnick's voice cracked. "Congresswoman, you don't understand the complexity of the financial system." Crockett interrupted again, sharper this time, her tone calm but unrelenting. "Complexity doesn't excuse corruption. Complexity doesn't excuse greed. And complexity doesn't excuse the fact that people lost their livelihoods while you counted your profits." The crowd gasped again. This was no longer just testimony, this was a reckoning. For Lutnick, each attempt to salvage dignity only deepened the damage. His words tangled into stammers, his usual fluency collapsing under the pressure of Crockett's relentless truth. He tugged at his collar, shifting uncomfortably, aware that the entire nation was watching him unravel. Crockett, meanwhile, remained poised. She wasn't merely exposing Wall Street's secrets. She was embodying the dignity and clarity that ordinary Americans craved in their representatives. Every sentence landed with the weight of lived experience. Every pause magnified the contrast between her composure and his collapse. In living rooms across the country, families nodded in agreement. Workers shared the clips with captions like, "Finally, someone is saying what we've all felt." Immigrants saw in her voice the echo of their own struggles, their sacrifices, their resilience against systems that had always favored the privileged. Crockett wasn't just winning a debate, she was validating millions. As the exchange stretched on, Lutnick looked less like a titan of finance and more like a man caught in the headlights of truth. The sweat on his brow became symbolic, a physical manifestation of Wall Street's fear when finally confronted. Every tremor in his voice, every glance away from Crockett's steady eyes, reinforced the story. Power was cracking. The hearing room buzzed with an electricity that no gavel could silence. Staffers whispered. Reporters typed headlines in real time. "Crockett corners Wall Street titan." Politicians in the chamber glanced at one another, some with smirks, others with unease, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would reverberate far beyond Capitol Hill. And Crockett, never raising her voice to a shout, delivered the closing blow of the exchange. "This country is tired of billionaires pretending they're victims. It's tired of excuses dressed up as expertise. What it's not tired of, what it will never be tired of, is the truth. And that's why we're here. To remind you, Mr. Lutnick, that no one is above accountability. Not even Wall Street." The words landed like a gavel strike, final and echoing. For a heartbeat, the room was utterly silent. Then came the gasps, the whispers, the frantic tapping of keys as reporters pushed updates to millions of screens. Lutnick's face told the story. The king had been dethroned, if only in that moment, by a voice armed with nothing but conviction. But the shockwaves weren't confined to that room. The clips spread like wildfire. Within minutes of the confrontation, timelines across every platform were flooded with Jasmine Crockett's words. Twitter lit up with hashtags Wall Street Exposed, Crockett vs. Lutnick, and simply Mic Drop. Each one climbed the trending charts as ordinary people, activists, and influencers shared the footage with captions that pulsed with vindication. Finally, one viral tweet read, "Someone is saying what we've all been screaming at our TVs for years." Another post, shared hundreds of thousands of times, overlaid Crockett's sharpest line, "Complexity doesn't excuse corruption," on top of a picture of Lutnick sweating. TikTok edits set her words to booming music, every pause timed like a cinematic beat. By nightfall, Instagram reels were racking up millions of views, portraying Crockett not just as a lawmaker, but as a symbol of defiance against greed. Late-night comedians wasted no time. One host played Lutnick's fumbling response side by side with Crockett's steady delivery, the audience erupting in laughter each time he stammered. Another joked, "Wall Street usually makes markets crash, but tonight, it was Howard Lutnick's ego." The crowd roared, and the clip made its own viral rounds, fueling the avalanche. Cable news rolled the exchange on repeat, commentators dissecting every word. Some tried to defend Lutnick, calling his mistakes human moments, but the dominant narrative was clear. He had been exposed, and Crockett had emerged as the unflinching truth-teller. A political analyst on primetime television summed it up. This wasn't just a takedown. This was a cultural moment, the people versus the privileged, and the people felt it. For viewers who had lived through foreclosure notices, through endless bills, through watching Wall Street bonuses skyrocket while wages stagnated, Crockett's words landed like a long-awaited thunderclap. In living rooms and break rooms, families replayed the clip, nodding, laughing, even cheering. For immigrant households, her composure and fearlessness struck deeper proof that voices rising from outside the elite could hold even the most powerful accountable. The validation spread with a wave of pride. Comment sections filled with lines like, "This is why representation matters." She spoke for all of us. Finally, dignity stood taller than arrogance. It was more than just applause. It was relief, a collective exhale from a country that had grown cynical about whether truth could ever win in the face of money. For Lutnick, the fallout was immediate and brutal. Headlines described him as shaken, cornered, and humiliated. Editorial cartoons showed him drowning in sweat, clutching dollar bills as life preservers. Memes transformed his nervous shuffling of papers into a symbol of Wall Street's crumbling facade. Every attempt he made to recover every statement, every half-hearted explanation, was drowned out by the tidal wave of ridicule. His reputation, once polished and commanding, had been shaken in the span of a few minutes broadcast to the world. Meanwhile, Crockett's star rose higher than ever. Interviews flooded in, profiles were drafted, and grassroots groups circulated her words as rallying cries. Activists praised her courage. Commentators framed her as the new face of accountability, and young viewers discovered in her a kind of political heroism that felt both rare and desperately necessary. In the span of hours, she became not just a congresswoman but a cultural force. And yet, even as applause poured in, something larger stirred beneath the surface. Her confrontation with Lutnick didn't just entertain, it exposed fault lines that couldn't be ignored. Calls for greater oversight of Wall Street surged. Petitions demanding accountability gained momentum. Lawmakers who had once been cautious now found themselves compelled to speak up, unwilling to be left behind as public anger swelled. The ripple effects stretched far beyond Capitol Hill. Wall Street insiders whispered nervously about perception, about the cracks in their untouchable image. Journalists dug deeper into Cantor Fitzgerald's record, emboldened by the public's appetite for truth. And ordinary Americans, scrolling through their phones late at night, felt something they hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, power could still be challenged, because Crockett hadn't just embarrassed a billionaire, she had revealed him. And in doing so, she had revealed the system he represented. The echo of her words carried far beyond that chamber, far beyond the news cycle, far beyond memes and hashtags. It was a reminder that truth, spoken plainly and courageously, still had the power to shake empires, and the calls for accountability only grew louder. When the dust of the confrontation began to settle, Jasmine Crockett did not bask in the glow of applause. She understood that the moment wasn't about her alone, it was about the deeper truth that had finally broken through the noise. Standing firm, she reframed the clash in terms that resonated far beyond one billionaire or one firm. Justice, she declared, her voice steady, is greater than greed. And no matter how much wealth or influence someone accumulates, nothing can outlast the strength of a people who demand fairness. Her words rang out not as partisan talking points, but as universal conviction. In that instant, she wasn't just a congresswoman questioning a financier. She was a voice for the millions who had long felt drowned out by the roar of money. The message was clear. Dignity in the face of power is America's most enduring value. Generations of immigrants, workers, and families had built this country not with hedge funds or trading floors, but with sacrifice, persistence, and faith that truth could still matter. Crockett tapped into that heritage, reminding the nation that resilience is its real currency and courage its true wealth. As she spoke, the energy in the room shifted. Reporters who had come expecting another exchange of talking points now found themselves writing about something more profound, a reminder of what representation could mean. On social media, her words were lifted into quotes, painted across digital banners, shared with captions like, "This is America at its best." In homes across the country, people who had grown weary of politics felt a rare spark of pride. It wasn't just that she had confronted Howard Lutnick. It was that she had used his arrogance as a mirror, reflecting back to the nation a simple truth. Greed may grow tall, but dignity stands taller. Every stammer from Lutnick, every bead of sweat, every flimsy excuse had underscored the power of her composure. And now she was reminding everyone watching that composure, anchored in justice, belongs to them as well. The crescendo built not in volume but in meaning. Crockett's steady voice echoed like a call to the nation's better angels. "We are stronger than corruption. We are bigger than greed. And when we stand together, no empire of money can silence us." It was the kind of moment that transcended politics, the kind that would be replayed years from now as a symbol of clarity amid cynicism. For the audience, it was more than validation. It was inspiration. People who had felt invisible suddenly saw themselves reflected in her words. Communities who had been told to accept inequality as inevitable found renewed resolve. Parents told their children, "That's what courage looks like." Teachers replayed the clip in classrooms as proof that truth still has a voice. Even as the chamber returned to its routine, the ripple carried outward. Crockett's words were no longer confined to the walls of Congress. They became part of a collective memory, a reminder that America's promise is not written in dollar signs, but in the dignity of its people. And yet, as powerful as the moment was, Crockett knew it was not the end. It was a beginning. For every billionaire exposed, another waits in the shadows. For every system challenged, another seeks to entrench itself. The fight for accountability, for fairness, for justice is never finished. It is only passed from one generation to the next, fueled by voices brave enough to speak when silence would be easier. But Crockett's fight is only just beginning. Howard Lutnick came into that chamber certain of his power, armored in wealth and arrogance. But in the glare of truth, that armor cracked. His voice trembled, his papers shook, and for once, the Titan of Wall Street looked small. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, never wavered. She stood tall, calm and unflinching, proving that dignity can outshine even the most intimidating displays of privilege. The title of this story is no exaggeration. Lutnick panicked. Crockett dropped the bombshell. And the echoes of that moment will continue to reverberate long after the cameras stop rolling. Because what we saw wasn't just one politician questioning one billionaire. We saw truth collide with corruption and truth won. That's the lesson to carry forward. When arrogance meets accountability, arrogance crumbles. When greed faces dignity, greed falters. And when the people's voice is spoken with courage, it always carries further than the hollow excuses of the powerful. Jasmine Crockett reminded us that the fight for justice is not only possible, it's happening right before our eyes. But this story doesn't end here. It's bigger than one clash, bigger than one firm, bigger even than one chamber on Capitol Hill. It's about a movement, one that demands accountability from those who've long hidden behind their billions, one that insists on fairness for families who've borne the weight of corruption for too long. And that's where you come in. If you believe in holding Wall Street accountable, if you believe dignity is greater than greed, if you believe voices like Jasmine Crockett's deserve to be amplified, share this video, subscribe to this channel, and join this movement. Because together, we can ensure the fight doesn't stop here. It's only just beginning.